The air in the living room felt heavy with the scent of stale grocery store cake and the sickly sweet smell of cheap champagne that my son Arthur had likely bought on clearance at the corner market. He stood there with a practiced grin, holding up a paper plate that was already sagging under the weight of a single flavorless slice, while my daughter Clara checked her watch for the third time in 10 minutes, clearly calculating how soon she could leave and get back to her real life. They had spent the bare minimum on this 70-year milestone, using plastic streamers that kept peeling off the crown molding and serving lukewarm soda in mismatched cups, because they didn't want to stain the good crystal they assumed would be theirs. By the end of the month, I stood by the fireplace watching them whisper in the corner, probably debating who would get the mahogany desk or the vintage rugs once the paperwork was finalized. And I was tucked away in the assisted living facility they had been circling like vultures for the last year. They thought I was frail and confused, a fatting woman who didn't notice the way they looked at my walls as if they were already bare. But as the clock struck 8 and Arthur raised a glass for half-hearted toast about family legacy, I felt a surge of cold clarity that eclipsed any sadness I might have felt for their betrayal. I waited for the silence to settle after his hollow words. Then I reached into the pocket of my silk cardigan and pulled out the copy of the deed I had signed only 3 hours prior. When Arthur asked what it was, I simply told them that since they were so concerned about the upkeep of such a large estate, I had decided to relieve them of the burden entirely. Their faces shifted from confusion to a mask of greedy expectation until I spoke the name of the new owner and watched the blood drain from their cheeks as they realized the gardener who had treated these grounds with more love and respect than they had ever shown me was now the sole proprietor of everything they had spent years plotting to steal. The silence that followed was the best birthday gift I could have asked for, until the back door creaked open and Elias walked in carrying a crate of fresh wood for the fireplace. His heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor, a sound that usually made Clara wince. But today, she just stared at him with wide, terrified eyes, as if seeing a ghost instead of the man who had tended her mother's roses for 20 years. Elias stopped short, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, and he looked from my children's pale faces to the document still gripped in my hand, his weathered face etched with deep lines of confusion. As I stepped forward and placed the deed directly into his calloused palms, telling him clearly that the house and every acre attached to it now belonged to him, for a moment he didn't move, his eyes scanning the legal jargon until they landed on the signature. And then he looked at me with an expression of such pure humility and disbelief that it brought a lump to my throat. He didn't cheer or gloat. Instead, he slowly removed his cap and held it against his chest, his voice trembling as he asked me why I would do such a thing for a simple worker. I told him it was because he was the only one who actually saw the beauty in what grew here, while everyone else only saw the profit. And as Arthur finally found his voice and began to scream about lawyers and inheritance, Elias didn't flinch. He simply looked around the dim room, not with greed, but with a quiet vow to keep the hearth burning and the gardens blooming. Long after the vultures had been driven from the gates, he turned back to me with a tear glinting in the corner of his eye, and promised that I would never have to leave my home, because as far as he was concerned, he was still just the man hired to make sure I was comfortable and safe. The sun had barely touched the horizon the following morning when the sound of frantic pounding echoed through the heavy oak front door, vibrating in the quiet halls that now belonged to Elias. Arthur was the first to arrive, his expensive silk tie from the night before hanging limp around his neck, and his eyes bloodshot from a night spent packing and calling every estate lawyer in the city directory, while Clara pulled up right behind him, her car tires screeching against the gravel as she stormed toward the porch, clutching a folder of old family records she intended to weaponize. They didn't even wait for me to answer before trying the handle, only to find that Elias had already changed the deadbolt at dawn, a precaution I had suggested with a weary smile when they saw me through the tall sidelight window, their faces contorted into masks of desperation. And Rage Arthur began screaming through the glass about elder abuse and mental competency, his voice cracking as he threatened to have the entire property cordoned off by the police, while Clara pounded on the wood, demanding to know how I could throw away generations of status for a man who smelled of mulch and rain. They were spinning in circles on the porch like trapped animals, realizing that the golden parachute they had counted on to catch their failing investments had been sliced away by a single stroke of a pen. Elias appeared silently from the hallway behind me, not with a weapon or a shout, but with a calm authority that seemed to shrink my children where they stood. He didn't open the door, but simply pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut one by one, blocking out their frantic gestures. And the sight of them scrambling to take photos of the house for their inevitable lawsuits, leaving the two of us in the peaceful, golden glow of the morning light, where the only sound was the whistling of the tea kettle, and the realization that for the first time in decades, the house was finally free of their hollow noise. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to see more emotional storytelling like this every day. Thanks for watching. And let us know in the comments if you think she did the right thing.